So let us go into deeper as to what is the farming scenario in this certain village called Palampur. First scenario, we have a certain land that is already fixed. And like I mentioned earlier, farming is the main production activity that is there in this certain village. Main production activity to such an extent that 75% of people's livelihood are dependent on farming. So what exactly is 75%? So you have 100 people in that particular, supposedly you have 100 people in that village. 75 people under that 100 people are involved in farming. Okay, and in this particular village, the land area that is given for cultivation is fixed, meaning we don't have the kind of liberty to say, okay, we need some more land for cultivation. A fixed land is already given to us, so in that particular fixed amount of land we need to do our cultivation. So when you have a kind of fixed land, you have to just grow your land, you just have to grow your crops within that piece of land, right? So ultimately there is no scope to increase farm production. So let me give you a small fun fact here. The standard unit of measuring land is often called as hectare. You would have heard of this. It is abbreviated as HA. So in local terms, they're also called as bigha or gunta. You should know that 1 hectare ultimately equals the area of a square with one side measuring 100 meters. So you have a square, right? With one side you have 100 meters, one side you have 100 meters. So what is the ultimate area that's here? 100 into 100, that is 1 hectare. Next question, when it comes to the farming area, the farming scenario in the village Palampur. Is there a way one can grow more from the same land? First, we've seen that the land is fixed and it's very hard to increase the kind of production in that kind of land. So now that do we know that you can just grow one crop or you can grow more crops? So that we are going to evaluate here. So this imaginary village is supposedly towards the east, the western part of Uttar Pradesh. And you must, in your geography lessons, you would have heard of these kind of crops that are called as kharif crops, right? So during the rainy season, that is the kharif crops, they grow jowar and bajra. You should remember that jowar and bajra do not require a lot of irrigation or water facilities. Hence, farmers prefer to grow these certain crops without any extra irrigation facilities from tanks or wells. They don't use all those, but they purely depend just on the rains, and these kind of crops are used to finally feed the cows and the buffaloes. Once they grow this in the rainy season, after rainy season, between the time of October and December, the rainy season is before October, right? So from October to December, they grow potatoes. And in the winter season, that is after December, that whenever the winter season is, that is called as rabi crops, wheat is grown. So wheat is a major rabi crop. So here you have seen within an entire year, based on the seasonal differences that are there, the farmers of Palampur prefer to grow accordingly to the season. So every part of the season has a particular crop. And also, for the times when there is no rainfall, irrigation facilities are used for crops like wheat and potato. You should know wheat is a highly water consuming crop, and hence needs irrigation facilities. Irrigation facilities can be from tanks or groundwater itself, or you can use it from wells. And how exactly irrigation? To pump the water from the ground, ultimately you need some kind of electricity. You cannot randomly pump it. So you need that kind of power to pump it from the ground so that it comes above the ground and finally starts to irrigate the farming land. So you should understand electricity was the main turner for irrigation. Previously, in olden times, there was no electricity. Now that there is electricity, irrigation has improved a lot, especially in areas where there is no rainfall. And the electric run tubes could irrigate much larger areas of land. And you should also understand, more the irrigation means better the crops, and better the crops means more the harvest. More the harvest as in surplus of crops that are grown, and surplus can be sold in the market, ultimately leading to the farmer making very good money from the harvest. So this has a final result as to the farmer, how his standard of living basically. So let us see as to the different kind of ways to increase production on land. How can you increase production on land? We know that the land is fixed, right? And you cannot just grow one crop the whole time. Otherwise, you are not diversifying your crops. So let us see how you can increase the production. First methodology is multi-cropping. What exactly is multiple cropping? The word itself says that you're growing multiple crops. That is, you're growing more than one crop on a piece of land during 1 year. This is the basic definition. Next, we have using modern farming methods for higher yield. For a greater harvest, you're using modern farming methods. What exactly are modern farming methods? That is, research scientists and scholars have done years of research and have come up with certain seeds that when you plant it and you put in more irrigation to that kind of a crop, you're going to get a higher amount of yield. More crops are going to grow, more amounts are going to grow. So let us see what that is. First, we will see what exactly is a yield. Yield is the kind of crop that is produced on a given piece of land during a particular season. So till the year of mid 1960s, that is around till 1965, traditional seeds were used, right? Different kind of the traditional as in ancient methodologies for producing crops were used, and they were not giving the right amount of yield that was required. Also, these traditional seeds needed less amount of water to grow. So what exactly happened? And also the traditional methods also included using the cow manure, the cow dung of the cow as manure, as a natural fertilizer. So ultimately the soil was very safe and there was no kind of a negative impact. So what exactly happened after 1960s? Let us see. After late 1960s, that is after 1965, there was this new revolution that struck India, that was the Green Revolution. So this revolution introduced to the Indian farmer the cultivation of only wheat and rice using high yielding variety seeds. The name itself is self-explanatory here. These seeds are finally giving you high yields, high level of production of that particular crop. Why exactly wheat and rice? You should know wheat and rice are the highest consuming products of our country. Majority of the population use this on a daily basis. But there was a negative impact here. Compared to the traditional seeds, which did not need a lot of irrigation and it did not need a lot of chemical inputs, HYV seeds needed a lot of irrigation and also chemical fertilizers and pesticides to produce the best results. It's a very general saying that if you're adding chemicals onto anything, that means there is a slight negative impact on that kind of production. Let me briefly explain to you the infographic that is here. So this infographic briefly tells you about the kind of modern farming methods and what are those. So first, like I mentioned, you have high yielding variety seeds. And you have fertilizers, different fertilizers to improve the quality of the soil and ultimately production. Likewise, you have pesticides to kill the pests or the insects that attack the crop. Then you have the major irrigation facilities that have developed with the increase of usage of electricity. That is, under irrigation you have the canals, you have pump sets, you have dams, and dams ultimately give out electricity. So it's an entire cycle. You build dams, dams help in the generation of electricity, and using this kind of electricity we can build canals and pump sets ultimately to irrigate our farming lands. Then ultimately you have the farm machinery such as tractors, plow sets, or whatever you use in the farm. So Green Revolution first hit the areas of Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh. Also, you should remember these areas consume a lot of wheat. So now that HYV seeds came into usage, you need a lot of irrigation, right? And you also need a lot of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Naturally, the cost of production increases. So when you use farm machinery such as tractors and threshers, it is a faster and a more efficient process in order to get your harvest. Rather than you doing it manually as to how this man in the photo is doing it, when you use tractors and threshers, it is more faster. Hence, when you do a certain work faster, you can cover a lot more amount earlier and production is ultimately greater in amount and ultimately faster. And like I've said, the result for all these irrigation and fertilizers, pesticides, and using of fixed capital such as tractors and threshers ultimately gave high yields of wheat. So now that we've evaluated two scenarios and we have seen the usage of modern farming methods, do you think the farming on where it is done in village Palampur, that kind of land, do you think this land will sustain for a very long time? We all know land is a natural resource. It's not a man-made resource. We have so much amount of land around us that is provided by nature. And we should also know land is very, very limited in quantity. It is not unlimited, right? So you have to be very, very cautious when you're using it. And reports have told that the modern farming methods such as Green Revolution, everyone has whoever the farmers of Western Uttar Pradesh or Punjab or Haryana have ruthlessly used the groundwater to an extent where the other people don't even have water to drink. So this is the kind of usage. They have overused that particular resource called groundwater. And Green Revolution has also had many negative impacts because there was an increase in use of the fertilizers and pesticides. The soil fertility has decreased. Naturally, when you're pulling out a lot of groundwater, there is a depletion of water table, and likewise I've said earlier that other people are not even getting water to drink. Let us see what exactly are chemical fertilizers. So they are certain minerals when they have to be dissolved in water. So ultimately they become this kind of a solution and are sprayed to the plants. You will be very familiar when you see farmers on the field having a kind of a bag that they are carrying and spraying over the plants. So that's either fertilizers or pesticides. So fertilizers and pesticides have this very wrong property of percolating deep inside the soil and ultimately reaching the groundwater and finally polluting all the lakes and rivers. And these fertilizers, they kill bacteria and microorganisms in the soil, and with this process it will be less fertile than before. So where exactly, which state has the highest kind of consumption of chemical fertilizers? It has to be Punjab, where Green Revolution was first introduced. The continuous usage of such fertilizers has finally led to the degradation of soil health. And like I mentioned earlier, the HYV seeds, when the modern farming methods cropped up, right? You had HYV seeds on one side, you had fertilizers on one side, you have pesticides on one side. So to buy all these and finally produce a certain crop, it is very natural that your cost of production increases. Earlier, they were all traditional seeds. If you had cows, you could use that kind of dung as a fertilizer. You had no kind of investment. But here you need to make an investment on buying these HYV seeds, buying the fertilizers, buying the pesticides. Naturally, the cost of production goes high, which ultimately hits the farmer itself. Next question we are going to evaluate. How is the land distributed between the farmers of Palampur? So we know that the land is fixed. How is it fixed and how much land is available to each person? That we are going to see. So now we cannot assume that there are 75% that are dependent on agriculture, right? In Palampur, we cannot assume that all 75% have land with them. We cannot assume that. Some will have land. Some are people who work for those people with land, and those people who work on other people's land, they are called as landless laborers. So this is the kind of distribution. Can you see on the left right here, right? Yes. So on the left here, the small box that you can see, so they are small pieces of land, very less hectares. The ones on the right, you can see large hectares of land. So they are distributed unequally, which means some people will have a lot amount of land, some people will have very, very less amounts of land. So those plots that are very small, that you can see right on the left side that we saw, they are around 2 acres. They are not in terms of hectares, but they are in terms of acres, which is a smaller unit. So these people with around 2 acres are called as small farmers. And those are called large farmers when their size of plot is very high, that is around 10 acres and more. So let us briefly evaluate as to what is the distribution of cultivated area and farmers. So you have here, let me briefly explain to you. The one in peach, right, is the marginal and small farmers. So usually these marginal and small farmers are those that have land measuring less than 2 hectares. And the one in red represent medium, semi-medium and large farmers, and usually these farmers are the ones that have land that are more than 2 hectares. So based on the cultivated area, 44.6% of the cultivated area comes towards the marginal and the small farmers, and 55.4% of the area goes to the semi-medium, medium and large farmers. So we've seen the cultivated area aspect of it. Let us see the number of farmers that are cultivating that certain area, right? So you have around 85% of marginal and small farmers cultivating a certain area. So majority, greater than 80%, that is 85% of farmers are more of cultivators rather than being landholders. And very less percentage of medium, semi-medium and large are actually doing the labor work. So here I can briefly tell you that these marginal and small farmers are the labor that are working in those areas which are greater than 2 hectares. Because either they have very small pieces of land and cannot make a livelihood out of it, or they have no land at all, right?